The content release schedule for the Old World does seem a little confusing at first glance, and there's been a lot of talk online about how they are going about it in the wrong way, perhaps even me included. However, I'm here to explain why I think this was actually the perfectly correct approach, and how the content release schedule we have lined up is both exciting and will help the game thrive in the long run. We have so much history to revisit in the Old World, and we as consumers are only able to excavate so much at once. The first big question is why we have access to very limited armies and products day one. This has been the main confusion for most players trying to assess the game. The reality is though, trying to release 9 factions with 15 products available per faction would be a complete information overload for consumers, a burden on manufacturing and shipping, and an end loss of sales as consumers only end up buying into the product initially and not continuously over time. The fact that I can't buy my Wood Elves right now, and there's no exact timeline on when they will be available, actually entices me into buying one of the Tomb Kings and Bretonnia armies because I love the game and all the factions like most people do. Maybe I'm going to have 3 to 6 months to build out that army before I even get to start my Wood Elves. Had everything been available day one, I only would have gone with purchasing Wood Elves, and who knows if I would have been enticed or hyped enough to return to another big army down the line. It also makes projections for Games Workshop unpredictable versus being able to control the rollout of content. We as consumers need the marketing, the hype. Once that dies down, we stop consuming as much. So now they control when and how to sell it to you. No sir, you can't have your Wood Elves right now, so I keep paying attention to find out when this will happen. The other benefit to this approach is that we get continuous hype and maintain interest for the game, because now every 2 months we have an opportunity where we can essentially get new factions phasing into the game to buy with their new books and models. If we look at these Google Trends data for a popular recent release like Starfield, see how we get this falling off a cliff of interest after the game launches. We can lessen this with the Old World because in our case we have most of the game held in reserve to trickle out. And we know our product takes a long time to build, paint and play, so consumers can't even use it all at once anyway. Most people playing the game have a main army, but they're certainly interested in multiple, otherwise they wouldn't enjoy the world enough. We're talking about a long hiatus returning to the fold with the Old World, so everyone is extra excited to see what the reimagined content for all the factions can be, and can be enticed to come in and play any one of those. 2024 is going to be a really strong year for the Old World because there is just so much historical miniatures waiting to be rolled out. This buffer of time also allows them to build out the new kits and hit home in 2025 and beyond. Now let's talk about those legacy factions and why I think this is totally fine for the game. If you were excited for the Old World and you were a Vampire Counts player of old, or you're a Vampire Counts player in Age of Sigmar or Total War, it certainly does feel bad to know you're not getting the full love that some of the other armies are getting right now. The reality is though, this is a totally normal cycle of rotation in any of Games Workshop's products. Certain armies in Age of Sigmar or 40k can go years before getting a model refresh and new books. Because we're at the start of the Old World, the legacy factions are essentially in the cycle right now. They will come, it's just a long-term play that somewhere some factions had to fall into. It's the simple reality of resources for any of the Warhammer games because there are simply so many factions, rules and kits to sustain. Now the great news is with these legacy factions that massively reduces the pain is most of them have readily accessible armies from Age of Sigmar and free rules from day one. It's going to be the perfect result for many people looking to play the game casually anyway, and Games Workshop know this. You can't feel too bad being a Lizardman fan when half your range just got new sculpts and we look over to the Tomb Kings and, well... But the next part of this equation that all makes sense is they're unable to concurrently integrate kits between Age of Sigmar and the Old World. We will see a huge release of Skaven for Age of Sigmar this year, and if we prematurely let loose Skaven into the Old World, that's going to hurt sales massively from what I have said before in that the time and effort it takes to build and paint an army in this game. You don't want someone going and buying 2,000 points of Skaven for the old world, then try and release a bunch of new kits 6 months later. Those people won't be happy, having known they could have waited a little bit longer for better models. They're also then handicapped into not being able to buy your new product because we have Skaven at home on square bases, and now we're stuck financially to afford them all over again. Games Workshop unfortunately are not able to support cross-game compatibility at this time between the Old World and Age of Sigmar. We have totally different base sizes and types, which means people can't easily use them for both games, despite both actual models being valid. They would break their own rules or force people to pick one or the other game. They don't want that. Instead, they're funneling consumers into the products that are made specifically for that game only. Over time, however, I believe this will change, but that's a video for the future. There are also flexible base adapters, but Games Workshop don't sell them, and the vast amount of consumers won't be able to grasp that process. It just won't take on in mass. Now, the cost of the game is a real thing. Getting even 1,000 points worth for more than one army would be a tall order for most people concurrently. That's why this content needs to be phased into circulation, for our own wallets' sakes. We don't want to kill all our chickens for the meat for the short-term profit. We want to let them live and lay eggs to give us steady, continual income. Overall, this approach is the safe one. Games Workshop don't know if the Old World will be a huge success that could actually start competing with Age of Sigmar. If that was to happen, then it potentially hurts sales of the mainline game. So keeping them very separate mitigates that risk until they have the data. And that risk is less than potentially hurting Old World sales because they held back on the game. Consumers waited many years since the announcement of the Old World, so they'll wait a bit longer for those legacy factions to come in if needed. Another thing we should consider is that these products for the Old World don't exist in store. They're online only. Games Workshop expect a level of community knowledge and uptake to be able to take things like legacy armies and make them available for tournaments, deal with things like metal kits, and even find 3D print options to bolster the gaps while buying some miniatures and rules from Games Workshop on the side. They're okay with that because they know it's widespread in the community already. They really can't even stop it. There are far less success in Age of Sigmar and 40k for things like 3D printing because those games are right in the shop front with cheaper starter bundles, great resale value of the models, and overall more support. They know, however, that those third parties that produce better looking kits than the Old World right now and for cheaper that consumers will gravitate to, and it will just compete with them for sales. So they have less profit to be made by re-releasing everything and just let nostalgia for the game carry through for people buying even their older sculpts. Combined with the fact that they're essentially competing with themselves, given many people already own big armies already. I myself have 2,000 points of Wood Elves. Even if they did an entire new line of Wood Elves, would I go and replace every single one of them? Okay, the answer to that may be yes, but please don't tell my wife. But you get my point. Now here's a great analogy to pat myself on the back. As you get older, you're more okay with the rip-off clothes or non-branded clothes. But when you were a teenager, everything had to be legitimate, right? To fit in with the crowd. But we're in a crowd right now that's totally cool with 3D printed armies and less of a notion that we only accept playing with Games Workshop models. Lastly, I think that having brand new armies on the horizon like Cathay and Kislev could be more profitable for Games Workshop and may also be another reason they've moved some factions to Legacy. There's really no profit to be made on Lizardmen anymore. All those kits are out there recently, but imagine the profit on making kits for Kislev and the hype this would generate. Overall, they can't sustain mass competitive rule sets. The more competitive rule sets you introduce into a game, the harder it is to balance. And balance has always been an issue and will always be an issue. It's the thing to balance 9 factions and test them, making sure they're all aligned, but to achieve this with 16 will be far harder. If the game does reach mainline success, they will hopefully put the effort back in to work with the scale of 16 plus factions, but it won't occur and can't occur in this first edition of the game. I'm also totally cool playing legacy versus legacy factions and things like arcane journal versus arcane factions if balance rolls out to be that way. So certainly some hard pills to swallow, but when I look myself in the mirror, those are the realities we have to accept for the game to thrive and survive, and practicality reasons. And we can fill the gaps with our own imaginations, rules, and 3D models where we need to. Hopefully this brought you some new insight and you're as excited about things to come as I am. Check out some of my previous videos on the topics above, and I respond to all the comments, so be sure to let me know what you think. Goodbye for now.